I'm Simon. Thanks for tuning into The Ordinary Filmmaker. If you're new here, click subscribe to receive notification of my latest videos and all the links to everything I talk about in this video, including gear discussed, or details on the Canon R5 contest giveaway can be found in the description down below, along with my affiliate links. And if you're interested in supporting my channel, take a look at my affiliate links. I have links to B&H, to Amazon, and Downtown Camera in Toronto. So if you are interested in supporting the channel and you're looking at buying gear, that's one of the best ways to do it. So here we are. It's another Saturday, and it's another day that's not overcast. We're going to probably start to see the sun showing up in the back in a little bit, but I fixed my overexposure problem. The problem I was having, and I did this in my 70D and I didn't have a problem. And one of you said, have you noticed Simon's been having exposure problems since getting the R5? Well, on the 70D, what I did is I locked in the shutter at 160, and then I set the f-stop, and it varies as to what I set that to. I'm not really too concerned. I think today I've got it set at f4. Yep, I set it at f4, and then I would set the ISO accordingly. And that worked perfectly fine on my 70D. Not on the R5. The R5 has so many more settings in manual mode than the R5, and it functions a little differently. So in the R5, you really have 3 settings, and then pretty well everything else is, well, automatic. So by setting the ISO to auto, exposure is able to be fixed, and exposure is able to, well, it looks a whole lot better, as you should see in this video. But let's get into our questions. Our first question is from Luke. Luke asks, what's your lens and body roadmap for the years to come? Well, let's take a look at the lenses first. I have the 24-105, and I'm very happy with that. That is pretty much my run and gun lens. It's the f4 version, so it does perform better in low light. The other lens that I have is the 50mm f1.2, and I use that for the channel mostly, and I use that down in the basement. It's perfect for in studio. It's got really good low light, and I'm very, very happy with it. But I also use it for taking portraits. On a full-frame camera like the R5, it really produces really, really amazing results. Next lens I'd like to get is the 15-35 or the 800 or 600mm f11. And I'm going to be getting those cameras, well, not cameras, I'm going to be getting those lenses very shortly. This coming Friday, I'm going to be picking up the 15-35 from Downtown Camera. Patrick's set me up, so I'll have that lens for a week. Then after that, I'll be getting the 800mm to try out. And that's exciting because I should be getting that lens right when we're coming up to another full moon. And unless the weather goes south, and this is Canada, once September for the 1st hits, weather takes a dramatic turn almost every season. Weather goes south, so hopefully I'll get some clear nights where I can get the moon and show those off. But I'm also, it's a little bit selfish because I'm interested in trying those lenses out for myself. Now, in terms of bodies, I want to own the A7S III. That looks to be a phenomenal camera. The video settings are amazing. It just looks to be a good, solid, amazing camera for the ordinary filmmaker. Now, it is a top-end camera for the ordinary filmmaker, but still, if you don't want to have to worry about overheating in 4K 60 or 4K 30, and the quality of 4K 30 on the A7S III is pretty much comparable or very close, and I know I'm going to get beat up on this a little bit, but that mode there looks pretty comparable to the Canon R5 with 4K 30 HQ mode, or high quality mode, or fine mode as it's also referred to in camera. So that's my plan. Outside of that, I don't have a lot of other plans for bodies because I don't, that alone there is a good, what, $10,000 in equipment, and that would probably, that's a good year for my roadmap. Outside of that, you know, I'd really like to get the RF 24-70 and the 70-135 when it comes out. But if I'm also getting the A7S III, I've got to replicate some of the lenses there and get something like a 50-1.2 or 24-70 there as well. So it's, sorry, 24-105. So yeah, does that help you, Luke? Innovation has a really good soul-provoking question. I'm contemplating selling my Canon 6D Mark II and 5D SR to buy the R5. Since I'd have the high megapixel and the flip screen, plus other benefits like IBIS, I fear only having one camera, and I still feel like the R5 and R6 situation isn't very stable. With it being such a big investment into mirrorless, do you think it's worth diving in and purchasing it? Innovation, this is a really good question. Now, whether this is for business or for personal, I would hold off and wait. You've got enough doubts. We're on the bleeding edge here. We don't have any firmware updates. So I would hold off and wait for your fears and your concerns to be addressed. We should be receiving a firmware update for the R5 pretty shortly, and that will help resolve some issues. But I want to take you back to the Canon EOS R. When that first came out, everybody was giving it bad reviews. And let's be honest, even Canon's autofocus, which is normally second to none, although in recent years it had fallen second to Sony, the dual pixel autofocus in video is, I think, second to none. It does a terrific job, but even on the EOS R, it didn't perform very well. And it took, I think, getting us to firmware version 1.4 before it became a solid camera, to the point now I would be tempted to take that over the R6 because of the overheating, or the lack of overheating on the EOS R. So what I would do, as I mentioned, I've got a list of capabilities. I'm going to be showing them later in this video. But these are the capabilities that I was looking for. I came up with, I thought, you know, what do I want out of a camera? I'm looking at a budget of $3,000 that very quickly went up to about $8,000. And yes, I'm talking Canadian, but this is an awful lot of money for me, even though it's being funded through YouTube. So I carefully crafted out, came up with the capabilities, the results, the outcomes that I wanted out of a camera, and the R5 checked most of those boxes. So I was very happy to purchase it. Yes, there's some concerns over overheating, and while I would like to see 4K HQ unlimited and not have the record times at all, I'm able to produce really, really great results with this camera. So I'm very happy with it. But for you, I suggest you do the same thing as well. Identify all the different capabilities that you're looking for in a camera and see where the R5 checks it off. And yes, you're going down from 2 cameras to 1 camera. So maybe one thing I might suggest is, which of those 2 cameras that you're thinking of selling do you use the most? And I would, if you can, hold off on selling that one. It's, you know, now that I have the R5, I have a backup camera in the 70D, and yes, it's not nearly as good, but if something happens to the R5, or let's say, you know, there's a recall, which I doubt there will be, I at least have a backup camera to fall back on, and that really, really matters. So if that means saving a little longer to get the R5, I would honestly consider doing that. I think that would make a huge difference in terms of insurance for you. Sean Ryan asks, do you use Canon's Camera Connect? Would you wait to use it until they figure out their security issues? No, I do use it all the time. I'm using it right now. I can see down here that I've recorded for 15 minutes. I can see my ISO and all that stuff. So I'm very happy with the app. Now, the security concerns are not related to the application, and I'm sure Apple would have pulled it if that was the case, because I got it off the App Store. The security concerns, what has happened, there's been a breach internally, most likely due to a phishing attack, and they've ransomed off about 10 terabytes of information, of which 2.2 of that has recently been released because Canon isn't, well, I don't know if they're not giving them any money, but they're obviously not moving quickly enough for the people that want the money. So at this point, I'm not too concerned. Now, if you are concerned about it, then put Camera Connect on a device that doesn't have access to your any of your banking information. So the iPad that I do use is not hooked up to any of my banking information. It's not hooked up to the cloud, or it's not hooked up to my Apple ID. So I don't really have any concern there. And it's connecting to the camera, and the camera doesn't have any personal information. So if you are concerned, there are ways of minimizing the risk, and that would be one of them. Jace asks, what is your opinion on the R6? I'm kind of in love with both the R5 and the R6, and I'm saving up for the R6 right now. Well, it really depends. I think for photographers, the R6 is truly an amazing camera. IBIS, the improved autofocus, the low light performance, the fast processor, all coming together make it so much easier to get the shot right the first time, and I'm very excited by that. On the video side, I'm not that happy with it. In 2020, no camera should overheat in 4K 30. Not at all. The R5 doesn't, and I don't know why this does. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. So if you were looking at it for video, at this point, I would either wait, or I'd consider the EOS R, which doesn't overheat in 4K. Oh, wait. They don't have 4K 30, do they? They have 4K 24. So if you're shooting 24 frames per second, maybe the EOS R might be better if you do video. But if you need 30 frames per second, well, the only way to get that with Canon right now in the hybrid line is go to the R5, which is quite a bit more expensive. So If you're looking at buying the R6 right now for video, I would hold off and wait to see what happens with firmware updates to see if they make any changes to the overheating, because 40 minutes is what they say, and if the heating changes or if you're fiddling with the menus, that can come down quite a bit. And to me, that is just not acceptable in 2020. 4K 30, 4K 24, having a time limit, or sorry, having an overheat limit, I think is a little ridiculous and a little bit silly. But photo-wise, no, the R6 I think is a terrific camera, and I think you're going to get incredible results with it. Lyle asks, what would be next in line if cameras were not your thing? I love understanding how things work. I love learning about things. And before I really got into cameras, cosmology, things big, or things on the large scale like black holes, planets, finding other planets. There's projects available where you can access the data and you can help identify planets. And I think that would be really exciting. But also on the micro scale too, the things of small, and trying to take the science of the big, the universe, understanding that and bring it down to the quantum level and trying to resolve those two different spaces, which is very difficult to do. And a black hole is a perfect example of where things break down. You've got something colossus, very huge, but then you've got something almost, you got a singularity that breaks down to very, very tiny too, where the quantum can't explain it. So I'd love to get into that. Before I got into cameras, I really did a lot of reading up on M theory and trying to understand superstring theory, which M theory is a part of, to understand how the universe works. The Higgs boson, of identifying that particle, was really, really huge too. But trying to make sense of the craziness of the world of the very small and understanding how things work. And you can see that in cameras, understanding how cameras work, which are based on electronics. And to see when we're going to move into photonics. So to get away from electronics and move into photonics and do experiments. I would love to use electronics to be able to test electromagnetic devices. I'd love to be able to experiment with magnetism, to put some sort of metal cage in the ground or within concrete, and then test devices that would levitate off that using electromagnetics. That was something I was actually planning on doing about 10 or 15 years ago, but the budget was a little bit expensive at the time. But yeah, that's the stuff that really I love. If there's a show on TV and they're dealing with anything related to that, I'm glued to it. That to me is more exciting than anything else. And I would even prefer that today if I was given a choice between a really, really good Peter Gregg video or some other camera video, such as one by DP Review, a real in-depth review of the R5 or the R6. But they just came out with a really in-depth look at the, let's say, a quantum singularity or anything other related to physics. I'd watch that first. So that stuff really gets me going, gets me excited. I just find it fascinating just how everything works and how solid the ground is, how solid this chair is, yet it's mostly all empty space. And, you know, just trying to get your head wrapped around that. Or even thinking of the atom. We're taught in school that the atom is made up of photons and neutrons, and photons have a positive charge. Yet when we try to put two magnets together, what happens? They repel, right? And so getting into the details of, well, wait a minute, then how does that all stick together? Now, particle physicists came up with particles called gluons that help glue things together. Sounds a little ridiculous, but yes, there is a particle called the gluon, and it's theoretical. It's what keeps the atom's nucleus together. Anyhow, I don't want to bore you guys with physics, but that's something I truly enjoy. Anybody else out there, a secret armchair physicist? Let me know. Dogka asks, so we know that the R5 will be receiving a firmware update with increased record times. Do you think this will make it over to the R6 as well? Well, we're definitely going to see a firmware update for the R6. When it's going to happen, how soon after its release, and what it's going to include is anyone's guess. The one thing I think they really need to address is overheat limits in 4K 60. For a camera of that price, $24.99 in 2020, having an overheat in 4K 30 to me is just absolutely ridiculous. The Canon EOS R, which came out in 2018, while it won't do 4K 30, it will do 4K 24, and it doesn't overheat. So I would really hope for that. Now, as far as overheating goes, Canon didn't address that, but in a recent interview on July the 10th, I think it was with Pro AV, a Canon technical expert, Media, said that once that's been lifted, referring to the record limits, It should be easy to record 4K 30 as long as you have a card enough and the camera is powered on from the mains. And she was talking about the R5, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't happen with the R6 too. The bodies are pretty much the same size, same processors, same technologies. I think these might be artificial limits put in there, so fingers crossed, just wait and see what the firmware brings, and this is one of those things where sitting back and waiting might not be a bad idea. Frosty asks, how about infrared photography and video for the ordinary filmmaker? Does the R5 support it? Filters, options, night infrared? Well, it's not so much that the R5 supports it. As you know, Frosty, all cameras in some way block infrared. That doesn't mean it's completely blocked. You can buy filters that screw onto the front of the camera, onto the lens, that allow you to pick up and shoot infrared. But these have some drawbacks, one of which you're not getting that full spectrum because the cameras do block it a little bit. The other option is you can send your camera off to a third party and they'll upgrade the sensor to enable you to do this. Here's the problem with that. You're taking your brand new camera, you're sending off to somebody, they're changing it, it'll blow away the warranty, and you've got a huge risk there if things go wrong. If you've got an older camera, I would definitely do that. To do this with the R5, unless you've got a bunch of them sitting by, that's not something I would tackle myself. But do you shoot infrared? Is it something you need? And what is your use case for that, Frosty? I'd be curious to know. Brian asks, what exactly is Cinema Raw Light? Brian, that's an excellent question. Cinema Raw Light is just simply well, the file sizes are much smaller than Cinema Raw, significantly smaller without loss of quality. So what you get is you get a file that's much easier to work with. They're much, you're not going to need as much horsepower. The files aren't going to be as big, so it's not going to be as hard to manipulate. I didn't even attempt to record 8K RAW on this camera just because I didn't want to get into that rabbit hole of dealing with those really large files. I recorded all 8K, which wasn't exactly small. So if you're thinking of recording in RAW, then Cinema Raw Light would probably be what I'd recommend to shoot with first, especially if you're an ordinary filmmaker and not a pro. The Remix Artist asks, does the R5 overheat doing 1080 or 60 or 120? That's a trick question, isn't it? No, it doesn't overheat doing 1080 at 30 frames per second. It doesn't overheat doing 4K 30. But it doesn't have the option of recording 1080 at 120 frames per second. Surprised? Well, technically it doesn't, but technically it does. Since you can record 4K 120, just simply record 4K 120 and then downsample in your computer. It's very easy to downsample. If you set up your project and it's 1080 and then you bring in a 4K 120 clip, then your computer will automatically do the work for you. If your computer's a little slow, then you might want to proxy that one particular file, but generally, because we don't shoot a lot of 4K 120, unless of course you're a wedding photographer, videographer, but even then you're probably in the end video not going to have a huge amount of space, but if you do, then just use proxies. But that's the way to get 1080 in, to get 120 frames per second in 1080, but there is, I think, a 7.5 minute overheat limit, an artificial overheat limit with the R5 for that. Rumor Has It has a great question, and Rumor Has It is a relatively new channel, so you guys might want to check it out. With the cost of CFexpress cards so high, are you considering the Ninja 5? Yeah, I'm definitely considering the Ninja 5. This is one of those things where I've done an about 180 on in the past couple of months. For my run and gun work, I wouldn't want the Ninja. I wouldn't want any external recorders. I want to keep the camera light. That's one of the reasons I went to the R5. It does a really, really good job. The in-camera audio is actually pretty good. I'm actually going to turn it off right now so you can actually hear how well the in-camera mic is. So it's off the Tascam is off right now and you're just hearing audio from the R5. So it does a pretty good job. It's got a lot of capabilities inside where I don't need an external recorder. And I really don't have to worry about overheat. The way I shoot in my run and gun stuff, even though I do 4K HQ, overheating has never been an issue and I don't likely expect it to be. Although it's annoying having that nagging feeling, wondering if you're going to come up against it. But if I do, I can always turn around and shoot in 4K 30 and not have to deal with the overheat once it's overheated. But the real benefit to the Ninja 5 for doing event work or studio work, such as a YouTube channel, is the camera's on a tripod most of the time. Having an external monitor isn't really, that weight isn't being a problem. Yes, you've got more things to worry about, but you've got some big benefits too. I just saw somebody who bought 2 ProGrade 650 gig CFexpress cards through my affiliate link on Amazon, and I think, what did that cost? It was around $1,300. Through B&H, you can get the Ninja 5 with a 1 terabyte SSD, and I think 2 batteries, 1 or 2 batteries, and I think it's around $1,100. It could be $1,200. So right there, you've got increased capability. Some of you have said, yeah, but Simon, now you've spent $4,000 on a camera, and now you're spending another $1,000 on an external recorder. That's just silly. Why don't you get the R3, or sorry, the A7S III? Well, it's not, because you're comparing apples to oranges. First of all, if you're spending $4,000 on a camera and you're finding an extra $1,000 too much, then you need to stay away from that camera, because that body is the least of your expenses. You can easily tack on another $10,000 to $15,000 in lenses and accessories. Where the external recorder comes in is not the fact that it allows you to record without overheating, or that it allows you to record without record limits. You're actually getting your output file in ProRes 422. And for those who are serious about editing, that's really significant. You've got a much better codec to work with. You can work off the SSD. And yes, even though the SSD might have a slower speed than some of these NVM2 SSDs, it's still more than fast enough to work on a standard film project. So I think there are a lot of benefits. So what's stopping me from getting it? Well, simply the cost. I've spent everything I could on the R5. And next up, I'm either looking at getting the Ninja 5 or the 800mm or another lens. And so I've got to think hard about that. Well, the Ninja does give me other capabilities. Do I really need them? Can I improve my workflow? I can speed it up a little bit, but I'm not necessarily improving my workflow. It's getting a different lens. Well, that allows me to, that gives me more capabilities, and that's something I got to think hard about. So if you guys are looking at buying a Ninja or anything else, if you use the affiliate links, then you can help me get my Ninja a little bit quicker. So great question, Rumor. What is the security issue with Canon? Should I be worried? Yes, good question. I don't know. It depends on what's in that 10 terabytes of information. 2.2 terabytes have already been released, and there's no personal information in it. But most likely that would be left to the very end, and will be what the company is or not the company, is what the organization is using to leverage Canon. So they've shown that they've already released about 22% of that information. It depends on what's in the remaining information. Is it customer data that's in there? Is there personal information in there? Do you have, what about credit card information? If you bought anything from Canon in the last little while, then maybe that information could be in there, and the only way to deal with that risk is to change your change your credit card information. But I can't speculate. I don't want to speculate what's in that information. Canon hasn't said anything, and the organization hasn't said anything yet. So it's just have to wait and see. But as always, when you're purchasing online, when you're doing anything, be very careful with your personal information. I don't let any organization store my personal information. Once I purchase something with a credit card and there's a little checkbox, store the information, no, I never do that. Then that's just sitting in a database waiting for something to happen. Where I get a chance, I use Apple Pay, because that helps protect me as well. That's one other layer of protection. Again, no matter how many layers of protection you have, it doesn't prevent an impact from happening. It just reduces the probability and the risk of that event happening. So just have to wait and see. As I hear more, I'll let you know more. I did publish a video earlier this morning, actually probably just about half an hour ago, that talked about this a little bit more. Or was it yesterday? Yeah, just take a look at my last few videos. I did address this recently. Johnny Boy asks, is Rec 2020 usable? Yeah, it definitely is. But it's pretty much, you pretty much just want to use it with 8K. Now, if you look at some of the comments in this video, you'll see others saying, oh no, you can use Rec 2020 if you set your camera to this, if you try this. And look, you can take almost any LUT and apply it to your video, and then you have a scale there where it says you can apply it at 100% or you can adjust it, and you're going to get a look. You're going to get a creative look, but it is recommended for 8K. It's not recommended for 4K and under. Jerry asks, overheating. Is it enough to sell all my Canon gear, take a financial hit now, and move back to Sony and the A7S III? Or do I keep Canon for photography and add Sony for video? Not a new question. RF lenses are so nice for photography that I really don't want to let them go. Jerry, I think you've just answered your own question. You do a lot of photography. You like the lenses. Why on earth would you make a bad investment and dump all that stuff for the Sony A7S III, which is primarily, well, I shouldn't say primarily, it's a video-centric camera. Everything about that camera says video. And for photos, a 12 megapixel sensor, while it can produce good photos, let's be honest, Jerry, if you've got a bunch of RF gear and you're happy with that, when it comes to photography, I haven't heard many complaints at all when it comes to the R5 and the R6. Everyone's saying that they're tremendous cameras. They're really good. And we're going to see a few firmware updates over the next 6 months or so, and we're going to make these cameras even better. So from a photography standpoint, no, I wouldn't worry about it at all. And when it comes to video, you know, I've been shooting this channel for the last, 3-4 weeks now with R5s. I had a Canon production model a week before the R5 was released, and then I've had my R5 since the release date on, I think it was July the 30th. So and I've been shooting mostly 4K 30. I've been shooting, lately I've been shooting mostly 4K 30 in high quality mode. And I'm very, very happy with the results. I am having to learn a little bit more because there's more options in manual mode, and I'm the overexposure problem. Again, me learning. Canon C-Log, again, me learning. And I'm shooting with C-Log again here today. And so I'm learning a lot about this camera. But if you're using 1080, the R5 isn't going to be a problem for you. If you're going to be using 4K, it's not a problem. Now, the A7S III is sharper, and I'm not going to lie, and I probably will get some hate on this, but if all you're doing is video, then you might like the A7S III better. There is some discussion as to which produces a better picture or which has more information to grade and work with, and that seems to be leaning to the Canon side. But for, it depends on what content you're doing. If you're doing weddings, if you're doing portraits, if you're doing run and gun stuff, like family stuff, anything like that, then I think that the A7S III is going to be a terrific camera. So if you want to go ahead and get that for video, keep what you have in Canon. I think you're going to be very, very happy. And if you have an EF glass, I think the EF glass can also be adapted to the Sony. And then you're into both systems. I wouldn't go out selling your gear. Hi, John. Great question you have here. Do you believe that Canon will or should recall the R5 or R6? I personally believe they won't and shouldn't. In my opinion, the bad press is Canon's own fault for hyping up the wrong attributes. It's a very valid opinion, and I agree they shouldn't have hyped it up so much without at least letting us know, yes, you're going to have some record limits. And that's all they could have said, there'll be some record limits. But from what we've seen over the last week or so, we've had 3 sources now telling us that the R5 doesn't overheat. A Chinese gentleman who did some tests on it. EOS HD did it, and then we had No Life. And I can tell you from running this camera for I don't know how long, it just doesn't overheat. And 4K 30, last weekend I shot for about 2 hours straight, and the camera wasn't hot. You're trying to tell me that by just bumping it up to high quality mode, all of a sudden that's enough for it to overheat in, 30 minutes? Something felt a little fishy. Some people believe that Canon is just being overly cautious, but I don't see this as being a hardware issue. Yes, I would have designed the internal hardware a little bit better. I would have put a heat sink on the processor. I would have moved the CFexpress further off, firewalled it, had a copper heat pipe, as they do in graphics cards, which do an awful lot of processing and are perfectly fine. So, yeah, I don't think there's any need for a recall. I believe that these overheat issues are created with software or firmware. I believe that Canon could easily roll those back. I think what Canon is doing here is they're trying to protect their other line of cameras. And I don't think they needn't do that. They produce really good cinema cameras, and if I was in the market for a cinema camera, I might grab a few R5s as B-roll cameras, but I wouldn't be looking at replacing my gear with R5s. All-day recording with these things, they're durable, they produce really good results, they're video-centric, built-in ND filters, and they shoot video in a very, very different way. I think I think probably there's some people at Canon that won this argument that were a little bit old-fashioned in their thinking, and I think we're definitely going to see rollbacks in record times. I wouldn't be surprised if they roll back the overheat a little bit too, but the key here, John, is we got to make noise. Whenever there's updates and news about this, I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to help pound the pavement. I'm going to help get attention to this, because Canon is willing to change. They do listen to us. Look what happened last year. Enough discussion about 24 frames being removed, and very quickly Canon said, okay, you know what? We're going to give it back to you across a line of cameras, and they did. So I think this can easily be fixed in firmware. I don't see there's any need for a recall at all, not based on the recent information. And if you look at this morning's video that I put out, I did cover that off, talking about Andrew Reed's article on EOS HD. If the R6 has the same sensor as the 1DX Mark III, but why do you think it overheats? The 1DX can shoot RAW without a problem. Do you think that Canon will fix the overheating issue? Because I feel like getting the R6 to shoot weddings, so if I need 60 frames per second without overheating, why do I think it overheats? Honestly, at this point, the way the evidence is pointing is that Canon has not architected. Okay, no, that's the right word. They've architected the software to prevent it from recording so long. So instead of just putting time limits in there, they've been a little sneaky. They're calling it overheating when technically it's not really overheating. They could push this a little further. Or maybe I'm being a bit too pessimistic, and maybe they've just been overly cautious. It's one of the two, but either way, it's looking like they've set their tolerances way too low on this. And from what Andrew Reed has showed us, if you're recording and the camera gets up to about 46 degrees when you're shooting, I think it was 4K 60 or 4K HQ, but after he stopped recording, it very quickly came back down to about 40 degrees, low 40s, right where he started recording 8K video. That's right, it was 8K video. And you know what? He went to start recording again, the camera said, no, it's overheated, when it was at the same temperature as it was when he first started recording. So there is something a little bit fishy going on. I don't know if it's a bug or if they've intentionally crippled the camera to prevent it from happening. But this is obviously, as it gets out and more people find about it, it's going to create a backlash, and I wouldn't be surprised if Canon makes a change here. So it's getting to be a very interesting story. I was hoping for things to slow down a little bit, to be a little bit less news, but thanks to this overheating gate, as we are starting to call it, we're probably going to hear a bit more about this. So look to the first firmware update on the R5, and the R6, we'll just have to wait, see if there's a firmware update to address overheating in 4K 30. I still can't get over that, 4K 30 overheating. You know what? If it wasn't for 4K overheating and not having all I probably still would have got the R5, but if I wasn't doing the channel, I would have got the R6. But not having all I and having overheating in 4K 30, not a chance. I'd go with the Sony a7S III over that in that case. But I said that out loud, didn't I? Bala says, there's speculation going on with the heating issue. Some say that there's a design flaw. Some say it's perfectly done by Canon. What's your take on this? Well, I've kind of answered this already. I don't think it's necessarily got the best architecture layout, but I don't think it's a design flaw. If anything, I'd say it's a little sloppy, you know, not having a heat pipe to try and keep costs down. You could have moved the CFexpress cards further away, that kind of thing, put a heat sink on the processor. But I wouldn't say it's a design flaw. I think what's shaping out to be is that this is more or less something that could be addressed in firmware. I think Canon set the tolerances way too low, and I also think they've set restrictions on it just to prevent us from being able to shoot 20 minutes of 8K and then start and stop, or stop and start and shoot another 20K. I think that's what they're trying to get at, so that we don't, or that I think there's a fear that it could cannibalize their cinema line, and that's something they just don't want to do. As I mentioned earlier, I think that's old-fashioned thinking, and the cinema line is very, very different. When they come out with a replacement for the C700 and it's going to have 8K, it's laughable for anybody to think that somehow a $5,000 camera is going to replace a $28,000 camera. They're very different use cases. It's kind of like taking a junkyard car that you picked up for $3,000, putting in a big block Chevy V8 that's capable of 450 horsepower, putting it up against a Corvette and thinking it's going to beat the Corvette. Sure, in a straight line, it might hold up really well, but if you take that same car and put it on a track, or not a track, if on a windy road, that car is not going to hold out. It's not going to be durable. It's not going to last. It's very, very different. And we've all seen this. We've seen people who have taken junkyard cars, have built them up, and they're fast, but they're good in a very, very narrow range of circumstances, whereas something that's purpose-built for a situation is just going to have the reliability and durability. So that's my final say on that. I love your avatar, Fletchy Dog. Fletchy Dog asks, when doing firmware updates on Canon cameras, once it gets to a point where there have been several updates, do you need to install each update in chronological order, or is it just installing the latest update to bring the camera up to the current spec? Fletchy, this is a great question, and I never know the answer to this, which is why I always read the documentation. In most cases, they're cumulative. So if you've missed a few firmware updates, you applied the latest one, it should work and apply all the other information that was in the other updates. Like for example, if you've got the EOS R and you buy it and it's only got 1.1 on it, if you download the 1.4 firmware, it most likely will apply everything that came before it. But read the documentation. So as you can see from this slide here, this firmware update is for cameras equipped with firmware up to version 1.6. So in this case, if you got version 1.1 or 1.4, go ahead and apply this and it'll bring your camera up to date. But yeah, definitely read the instructions. I always open up the README file whenever I do an update because there's usually useful information in there, because the last thing you want to do is risk bricking anything, let alone a $4,000 camera. Nick asks, when shooting 8K on the R5 and frame grabbing from video, how good is the image quality? Canon claims 35 megapixel images. Are the raw images better quality than the 5D Mark IV 30 megapixel raw files, or is the image quality lost in the process? You know, I was curious about this myself, and somehow I forgot to record the 8K to test it, but I did do it with 4K just a few days ago. I needed a photo that I didn't have, and I thought, oh, let's see if I can grab something for my video. So I was using Final Cut. I found a frame that I really liked. I made it full screen, and I did a screen grab. And for thumbnails, it's perfect. For doing any other promotional stuff, I think it's perfect. For posting on Instagram or Facebook, I think it's more than acceptable. The quality's good enough. No one's going to look at it and go like, this looks pretty bad. In fact, I was quite surprised by it, but I didn't pixel peep. And if you're going to pixel peep, the video isn't going to look as good. Let's think of it this way. The R5 is a photocentric camera with very, very good video capabilities. Why on earth would you shoot video when you would shoot photo? And I think if you're doing production stuff, you're definitely going to want to shoot the photo side to get your stills. But for the ordinary filmmaker, for if you're a wedding photographer, if you're doing other things, and you missed a shot and it's in video, I think if you shot it in 8K, you'd have more than enough information. But like I said, even in 4K, I was pleasantly surprised with the quality. Without pixel peeping, it looked very good. My wife was very happy with it, and it worked for us. But yeah, I think that's probably a good idea to do another video where I will do some pixel peeping. I'll shoot some 8K video. I'll shoot some 4K video. I'll even shoot some 1080 as a bit of a baseline so we can see the quality of what the stills look like if it's pulled from video. But really good question. You got me thinking a lot. David asks, for lenses bigger than 200 millimeters, do you think lens stabilization is worth the extra money if you have IBIS? Especially seeing as most long lenses get used on monopods or tripods anyways. That's a good question. Even now I'm rethinking my answer. Yeah, I think it's worth it, especially if we look at the 800 millimeter and the 600 millimeter. Those lenses, those are perfect example of lenses where they're not very heavy. And you can swing them around. It's a lens you can take out with you just for a walk and go, hey, I'm going to see if I can get some shots, especially the 600 millimeter. And if the light's a little bit lower, if it's not ideal, or if the subject is really far away, having that in-body image stabilization, coupled with that low light sensitivity, coupled with the very, very fast focus and the fast processing, is going to help you get really good results. David, do you remember all the comments we got when I first mentioned the rumor about the 600 millimeter and 800 millimeter at f11, and how people were saying like, this is crazy? And even I kind of wondered, well, this must mean they've really done some wonderful things inside the camera. Otherwise, how would this work? And sure enough, everybody from Tony Northrup to DP Review, they're all saying that yeah, these lenses work pretty good. No, they're not as good as a $13,000 lens, but for the ordinary filmmaker, it's highly affordable. And you can get some really, really great wildlife shots. It's locking onto the eyes of not just birds and dogs, but insects. And it's a really good job. And it gives you that little bit of extra steadiness. So yeah, if you're on a tripod, most of the time, not an issue. But if you've got some, the 600 and 800 millimeter, where you're not having to lug a tripod around, and that's the question you need to ask yourself. David, if you don't have to lug around a huge heavy tripod, isn't that IBIS worth it? Peter asks, what's your opinion of the reviews that push the R5, R6 beyond the manufacturer's limits, then condemn the devices that they themselves have caused the situation? Would they do the same to a new motor vehicle? Well, that really depends. If, for example, the Corvette, the makers of the Corvette, GM, came out and announced the Corvette and said it would be it's a 9-second car, then everybody's going to go out there and test to see that it's a 9-second car. Now, if GM said, well, yes, it's a 9-second car, but the test can only be performed up to 23 degrees, and the car can only run this fuel, it only can run this oil, it has to have these tires on it, the person driving the car can't weigh more than 80 pounds, then they're going to look a little bit foolish. So part of the reason why we have this, Peter, is Canon's come out and said 8K, and they've been saying it since February. Yes, it does 8K with IBIS, with autofocus in all 8K modes. Then they came out and said, yes, it's definitely video, and yes, it does 10-bit 422 internal H.265 8K. And not once did they mention with an asterisk that there are record limits, and that probably would have helped save them. So when it came out, and this is where I do have a problem with this, Peter. If you're going to put it in a camera, you're going to say it's there. And the timer, your essential record timer starts when you turn the camera on, you're fiddling with the menus, and you spend 5 minutes in the menus, you shoot a few photos, and then you only have 2 minutes of record time. That's wrong. And what we're finding out now is that these overheat settings are not really based on the camera overheating, but they're based on Canon. For whatever reason they're setting there, it's based on settings that Canon has provided. So I think there is a little bit of misleading marketing going on here, and that's the reason why a lot of this has happened. But on the other side, Peter, the video modes that I use in this camera, the overheating has been a non-issue for me. I do really wish that 4K HQ didn't overheat, because I'd be shooting all these videos in 4K HQ. I love 4K HQ. And if it hit the wall at 30 minutes, I'd go ahead and stop and start, and I'd record again. Like, we're at 7 minutes. This is the second. So I've shot about 26 minutes, and then I shot another 26 minutes. I stopped it, started, and I stopped and started again. And it's annoying. I can get a Ninja if I want to, but I can work around it. But if I shoot 26 minutes, stop it, start it, and the camera says, oh, you've only got 4 minutes, and then we need a 2-hour cool down time, that's just silliness, because the camera cools down within minutes, as at least 3 individuals have shown. So, and on the photo side, yeah, it's a great camera, I get that, but I would say that a lot of what's happened here has been Canon's own making. They have hyped this so long, and when you hype something up for so long, guess what people are going to do? They're going to call you on it. And they're either going to say, wow, you've done an amazing job, the technology here is, like they're saying with the Sony, technology is amazing, or they're going to say, you've told us a half-truth here, which in a half-truth in a way is a bit of a lie, and people have been coming down hard on them instead of focusing on some of the amazing things, like the fact that we have video without a 1.7 crop anymore, that we have IBIS that's really good, to the point now where I get such incredibly steady video. It's almost like I'm running on a glide cam. It's really, really good. I have a super fast processor. The autofocus is even better, and bringing all those together produce a really, really solid camera. But they decided to really push 8K and didn't mention any caveats, and so that's what's happening right now. It's a mess of their own making, I would say. So let's see how the firmware updates go. Eventually this will subside, as things always do. The EOS R, like I said earlier in this video, had a lot of issues at the beginning, but by firmware 1.4, it was a very solid camera and a very good camera, and I'd be happy to have one right now. In fact, if given the choice, I'd be tempted to buy the EOS R over the R6. Yep, I seriously would, although not having 30 frames per second is a bit of an issue for me. JC Never Stops says, I personally disagree on the statement that the R5 is future-proof as it has 8K, 4K, 20, etc. Although it has these fantastic capabilities, and not to knock the camera at all, but as I feel as though, well, in the coming years, it won't quite compare to what is to be released. I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on the longevity of the camera. Well, I'm actually one of those people that believes it does help future-proof me. And here's the simple reason why. The primary use cases that I have for getting the R5 is for video. This is a list of the capabilities that I assessed the R5 when I was looking at getting the camera. So for me, trustworthy autofocus was very important, and we can see that the camera does that very, very well. High detail in 4K and 1080, and the only reason I went orange on the R5, and it's really more than orange, it's more than passable, is that we have the overheating in 4K HQ. But you could very easily turn this one up to green. You can see, looking here, that it's, and I haven't finished grading this, but you can see that it's pretty much looking really good for me. And again, going back to video, the primary use cases that I bought it for, there is not going to be any reason why I'm going to need more than 4K in my house. I have a couple of 52-inch TVs. I never sit close to them, always about 10 to 12 feet minimum away from the TV, at which point it's very hard for me to tell the difference between video that's shot in really detailed 1080 and 4K. And with most of my videos that I'm going to be producing in 4K HQ, I don't see the need to upgrade for many, many years. The camera will probably die before I need to upgrade. Where I will be putting my money is into lenses, and that's what matters more. So Canon's still going to make money out of me, but in terms of upgrading, and again, looking on the photo side, this camera is more than what I need. So yes, I don't see the need that I don't see the need to upgrade in 3 years from now, but you've got to look at your own capabilities. And if you do something similar to what I've done here, then you can very easily assess whether the R5 is going to meet your needs. What could they do with video that would make me want to go out and get the R6 Mark II? Okay, yeah, record times. Yeah, overheating, but those should be fixed here. And I'd rather get a Ninja 5 to extend the life of the R5 than go out and get another camera. I'm really hard pressed to find out what technology, but if they do release a new technology that makes my workflow easier, that produces better results, then yeah, I would consider that. Really amazing dynamic range, 10-bit, where it's not going to need a super fast computer to work with, for example. But yeah, I'm not afraid to go back on what I've said before. I've said that with the Ninja 5. I've said that with the CFexpress cards. As you grow and as you think and you reflect on your decisions and what you're looking for in something in your vision, it's very easy at some point in your life to come across and say, you know what, I'm going to change my mind on that and be perfectly able to do so because I've done it as an informed decision. So that's why I think these capability maps are very, very important. It's a way of quickly writing down what it is you need out of a camera, the outcomes you expect, color coding it in a way that's very visual, very easy to make an informed decision, and where you compare the R5 to about half a dozen other cameras in a very visual, easy to make a decision way. Hussein asks, what do you think of the Fuji X-T3 in 2020? I think the X-T3 is still a great and amazing camera. But, and a big but here, the X-T4 is so much better. It's not that the X-T4 has 8K or 6K or incredible, amazing features that make it stand out. It's that they've taken the X-T3 and they've pretty much improved on every capability. Here's a capability map I've got of the X-T3 comparing it to the X-T4. And what you can see here is that the autofocus is pretty good. I would actually say that they've improved upon the autofocus in the X-T4, and that, even though I've graded it here as passable, I'd say it's better. You've got great detail in 4K and 1080. Slow motion is there. But you've now got IBIS. You've added IBIS to it, which gives you a much greater lens selection. If you're doing video work, that's very, very handy. If you're doing photo work, it's very handy. So IBIS is a huge plus. But you've also got that flippy screen. And for shooting video, a flippy screen is very handy when you're behind the camera. If you're in front of the camera, I don't believe in using it. And, for very good reasons, is you've got that small flippy screen. Or I can have this here, which is the Canon Connect app. I put it down here, And at a moment's notice, I can see how much I'm recording. I've got a bigger screen. I've got all my values and variables that I'm shooting with. I can see battery life and all that stuff. And I think that's better. But when you're behind the camera, that flippy screen is very important. And yes, it costs a little bit more, but if you're really liking the X-T3 and you're thinking of buying it, do what I've done here. Identify your own capabilities and compare them against the X-T3 and the X-T4. I mean, everything's a little bit better. Record times are a little bit better. Picture quality is a little bit better. Color accuracy is a little bit better. For me, with my capabilities, I wouldn't touch the X-T3 now that the X-T4 is out. I just think it's that much better. They've done an incredible job of going back and just improving and tweaking everything. And for my final question from Andrew, he's lobbed me a very easy one. Hi, Simon. How's your recovery from surgery going? Hope you're feeling better. Yeah, I do feel a lot better. I can get out of bed without issues now. I can walk a good kilometer or two and not have any issues. I still have to be careful with lifting weights. The last few days, I noticed a problem with my steps here on my deck, and I don't think it was, we were probably more than a week or two or a few rainstorms away from somebody stepping on the steps and their foot going through, and potentially, who knows, my son, if he had done it, could have broken a leg or something. So I got out the drill, I unscrewed all the planks, and what I could see is, yes, they were rotted, but worse still is it wasn't just the surface pieces that were rotted. A whole lot of the inside pieces were rotted, so I unscrewed as much as I could, but then I realized it came to a point where I just didn't have the ab strength, or I didn't want to risk causing any damage. So I called in a friend of mine who's a general contractor, and he finished the rest of it for me. So I know that I'm still not quite there. I'm doing baby steps. I've been to my second rehab session because I want to make sure I heal properly and not risk causing any damage. But I feel better. And something a little strange has happened too. In the last 10 years, I've been having food sensitivity problems. I can't eat dairy at all. I can't do spices, but even vegetables were passing through me like crazy. It was like I have had an IBS. Well, since the surgery, my digestive system has relaxed a lot more. And I don't know if any of you else out there have had an appendix out. Has it changed your diet, or has it changed how your system reacts? For me, it's definitely been an improvement, and which has been great news. So, Andrew, thank you for the question. A very easy, soft question to lob my way. I am feeling better. I've been on vacation for the last 2 weeks, and I've been using that time to recover. And for my last week, I want to get out a little bit more. On this coming Friday, I'm going to be picking up the Canon RF 15 to 35 millimeter, which is a very expensive lens, a lens that's on my roadmap, and a lens that I'm excited to try. So this time next week, I should be shooting with a 15 to 35. And I plan on doing a lot of run and gun with it too. Unfortunately, I'll be back at work, but I do get off at 4 o'clock, and that gives me a good 8 hours before bedtime to play around with it. So I'll be producing a few videos with that. And then the following week, I'll be picking up the 600 millimeter. I'm really excited to try that. Again, I'm a little bit nervous because as we enter September here in Ontario, you can pretty much, once September hits, you know to kiss any good weather goodbye. Generally swimming in the lakes, it's too cold, and it's amazing. You can have really great warm water, and all it takes is that first storm. It stirs up the currents or the water, so you lose all the cold air, all the cold water comes up, and it becomes very cold. You get a lot of rain. Now, in the recent years, not every year's been like that, but things change here. It's like up north. If you go up into the Yukon, once you hit August, things start to change. Well, here, once you hit September, things start to change. So I basically got about 2 more weeks of good, solid summer weather before things will start to change. And I don't know, how am I going to shoot these videos outside? I've been wondering, do I shoot them inside, or do I try to rig up a situation where I can shoot in the rain? We'll just have to wait and see. But thanks so much for your question, and thank you everybody for your questions. One last thing I want to let you know. Everybody who submitted a question that I have actually read off, so every question that I've read off here, for each person that submitted that question, you've earned an extra entry into the Canon EOS R5 contest giveaway. But there's also an opportunity for you who haven't had your question read to find an object that I've hidden somewhere within the frame of this video. It's not there right now. I only had it there for part of one question because I don't want to make it too easy. Some people get the notification right away and they get out there and they quickly turn on the video and they always get it. I want to give everybody a chance at guessing it. Oh, and by the way, earlier in the video, I turned on the in-camera mic. I let it run for the remainder of that question, but then the rest of the video, I've been using the Tascam mic, but I've also kept the in-body mic on at about -7 dB because, excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice. No air conditioners have been on. No water pumps have been on, except for there was one water pump on a little while ago. And even traffic. You hear how quiet that is? I mean, the traffic sounds like it's far away. It's just a beautiful morning out here. Even the birds, they're a little slow to get up. I got one over here in the tree. I got one all the way up on the house. It's trying to, I don't know why he's pecking at the aluminum cladding, but he is. Can you hear him? I don't know if the R5 is picking that up. I know the Tascam won't. But it's a beautiful morning. It's now 8 minutes to 8. I've been recording for about 70 minutes. Yeah, 4K 30, 70 minutes. And I'm not running out of space. It's 61 degrees, so it's a little chilly, but, you know, I'm made of British blood, so, you know, this is not all that cold for us. Cold and damp is quite normal for us. Cold, damp, and wet, which is definitely not what I've been encountering here in this summer. We've had very little rain, and even in the winter we had very little precipitation. I think the amount of times I took the snow thrower out was rather limited. So, but anyhow, yes, I give you guys an extra entry to the first person to identify what the item is, and it is not this mouse. What I use this as my clicker, so give you an idea. Let's see if I can do this here. I'm doing this the cheap way. I'm holding up this here so to give you an idea of what my setup is. So you can see I'm in the chair here. And then what I have is my laptop right here with all your questions on them. And then what I do is usually the night before or the day before, I'll go through and I'll put in some speaking notes that I want to make sure I think about. Because I do sometimes forget, well, what else did I want to say? And I use the mouse as a clicker. Now, normally I leave it right on the chair beside it with my water. And because I don't want to risk dropping it, especially with the grass, it's very damp right now. And I'll click, click, click. So that is not the object that I'm hiding. It's something else. But that's it for now, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like a chance to win the Canon EOS R5, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel. I do have more details in the description down below, but that's it for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.